Hello and welcome to the M Word. We are very privileged indeed to have the delightful Rebecca join me today. She is going to talk about one of the most sensitive subjects I've ever known in my career, talking about fabricating induced illness. And this is something that's really personal to Rebecca. Couldn't have asked for a better person, because not only has she experienced being subjected to this delightful not label, she actually volunteered and said, I'm more than happy to come and talk about it. So Rebecca, thank you so much. Perhaps we could start with where you'd like to start in telling us this journey, because it sounds absolutely horrific.
Oh gosh, yes, it was absolutely horrific. I can't tell you how awful it was. Probably one of the worst things that's actually happened in mine, certainly my family's life. It happened probably about 3 years ago, in 2019, and really started when my daughter, she fell off her bed backwards and hit her head, and it was the back of her neck and the top of her head. And we checked her for concussion. She seemed absolutely fine. And over the next literally 48 hours, she started literally having symptoms of concussion. So she started feeling sick. Her vision was slightly blurred, and she was just generally feeling quite unwell. So obviously we were very concerned. We took her up to the local hospital.
Yeah.
They checked her out. So she had concussion, and basically did nothing more apart from send her home. Over the next probably about 6 weeks, her symptoms became more and more severe, and this included having blurred vision, double vision. We took a eye test to check that she was okay under the doctor's recommendation. She started feeling more and more sick, more and more really unwell. We visited the hospital A&E three times altogether.
Yeah.
And over that period, her symptoms became horrendous, and to the extent she was actually having paralysis in her legs and arms, daily vomiting, and just generally just feeling absolutely horrendous, and her balance as well was off.
Yeah.
Now, we were told it was still concussion, but no one could actually tell us why. Obviously the symptoms were getting more and more severe.
Yeah.
And every time that we went out, we were also told as well that she should return to school, that there was no reason why she should stay at home. And we found out later that went completely against the NHS and NICE guidelines. So when she had concussion, she should have actually just completely rested until all the symptoms had gone away. And it was the fact that basically we were trying to get her back into school again to give her some normality, obviously because we were worried about her having time off school, missing school.
Yeah.
That we were told later that would have actually been one of the main causes of the fact that she wasn't getting any better and that she was deteriorating. Eventually, the third time that we went to the hospital, unbeknown to us, the A&E doctor there, who was actually really lovely, he actually diagnosed what's called post-concussion syndrome, which is basic when the neurons get ripped apart. It doesn't show on an MRI. It wouldn't show on any of the scans that they did or were going to do.
Right.
And so basically, it's kind of like with their unknown illnesses, but it is very hard to, unless you go to a specific neurologist, it's very hard to diagnose as such.
Right.
But basically, she had all the symptoms of it. She was actually textbook, which was one of those.
Yeah.
We did have
school because she wasn't allowed to rest, and she was told she had to go back to school.
Yeah.
And had she taken any time off school?
She had taken sort of days off school, but not really very much time at all, until kind of like the third time, where literally with the paralysis in her legs and everything like that, we were extremely worried.
Sure.
I mean, she was even having periods of blindness too, which was really, really scary for her and for us.
Yeah.
So we actually had a neurology appointment. Our local doctor had arranged a neurology appointment, but it literally wasn't for probably about sort of like 5-6 weeks. And as literally she was going downhill really, really dramatically, we were terrified that there was something else wrong with her, and the blow to her head had caused much more serious damage. So anyway, the very lovely consultant in Gloucester A&E referred us to a paediatrician in that same hospital, who was not a neurologist, and had no basic neurology bent whatsoever. Anyway, we went to her thinking that we would find out all the answers, and she was completely the wrong person we should have gone and seen. She was quite unpleasant, actually. She took no notice of my daughter's symptoms, didn't seem at all worried. She obviously couldn't explain them. She hadn't, and we only found out later, actually, even though she wrote on the actual diagnosis, post-concussion syndrome, it was very, very clear and obvious that she didn't know anything about it, and she'd actually used the diagnosis from the A&E consultant to actually put this on here. She refused to do any other tests, and she told my daughter to swallow her vomit.
Wow.
Yeah.
That sounds extremely unpleasant, and I'm not clear why somebody would be.
No, I know. She said, just swallow your sick back down. And as you can imagine, I was absolutely horrified.
Yeah.
I didn't say anything to her at the time. Me and my daughter just looked at each other and oh my God. And as soon as we got over there, I said, under no circumstances whatsoever do you swallow your vomit. I will tell you as well that later on, we were told, and we found out later from other sources, we were told that this was from a nurse from Headway, that a child had actually died from not even swallowing the vomit, from actually holding the vomit in their mouth, and then they breathed in and aspirated the vomit into their lungs, and the acid from that basically killed them. They couldn't breathe. So obviously what she was saying was life-threatening, really.
Yeah.
So
and was there a reason as to why the A&E consultant had referred to this particular paediatrician, or was
I think it was
referring into pediatrics?
I think he was just referring into pediatrics to basically see if he could do anything in the meantime while we were waiting for neurology.
Yeah.
But so anyway, we made a complaint through PALS, and PALS said that they would actually go up to her and have a conversation with her about but also, I mean, to be honest with you, at that point we were just desperate for someone to tell us what was going on with her, and at that was the point at which everything changed.
Wow. Okay.
So it started off with our neurology appointment being cancelled. Now, I get the impression as well, I can't tell you for sure, but I get the impression that inter-county, they do not share information. So I think that she actually rang up the neurology in Worcester and basically said we didn't want an appointment anymore because and put a diagnosis on this, but because a lot of the out of county, they don't share information.
Right.
So our neurology appointment was cancelled.
When did you find out about that?
We got a letter sent saying it had been cancelled.
Right. So then presumably you rang up and said, I haven't cancelled this appointment. Why has it been cancelled?
Well, because they'd actually got a diagnosis on there, they basically say because it's been diagnosed, you obviously don't need an appointment.
Huh.
Yeah, I know, exactly, we were not happy about it, but also as well at that point, we were literally on the verge of lockdown too. So all of this was going on you know, people were kind of very, very worried, especially obviously medical professionals, about, you know, people coming into the practices, etc., etc. So, I mean, we didn't even know whether we were even going to be able to go and see anybody again.
Yeah.
So, anyway, we decided she was very, very unwell, and we had over the Christmas, basically her face started sort of blowing up, and her head started blowing up, and she had paralysis in her legs. So in the morning she would wake and she couldn't basically walk, and this would last for about 5-10 minutes. And obviously that was another thing we were really worried about, with everything else going on. And so we rang up because she'd said, "Oh, you can come and see us anytime if you need to." So obviously we did, and at that point she did actually order an MRI, but obviously post concussion doesn't show on an MRI, and that's down to Headway. Headway are the sort of like the body who. They are the people that basically give information to doctors about different, obviously, neurological conditions.
Yeah.
And yes, it says on all the literature that basically it doesn't show on it. So that wouldn't have shown it up.
Yeah.
So anyway, so we had that, and then literally we had to go to her a third time because my daughter then started fitting.
Oh my goodness. Right. Okay.
And fitting not only for kind of like a minute or so, literally it started, I mean, it was sort of going, I mean, proper fitting, with eyes rolling back into her head, jerking, tongue out. It was very, very scary, and this would go on. This was after she'd been discharged. This would go on for sort of 20 minutes and per night, and she would have like 2 or 3 fits a night. And it was really, I mean, it was terrifying for her, let alone for us.
Yeah.
So anyway, third time, basically we went up to her because we started seeing sort of the first signs of fitting with her, with her head, eyes rolling back into her head.
Yeah.
And oh gosh, it was absolutely horrendous. So we walked in, and it was obvious that there was no way that she was going to do anything. So we've got an MRI in a couple of weeks. She said, but I actually think it's down to anxiety. Well, I said, right, okay. I said, well, that. I said, how can kind of, you know, losing, because also she was having fits of blindness too, where she was losing her eyesight, which was obviously very terrifying. But so how can this be anxiety? I said, I know obviously, you know, anxiety can cause some sort of fitting. I said, but I said, you can't. I said, her head is swollen up. I said, how can it cause your head to swell up? I said, it just doesn't make sense. And there were lots of things. I mean, as a parent, you do have to start there thinking, okay, could it be? I mean, because, you know, you have to try and rationalize that. I was sitting there thinking, well, could it be this? Could it be that? Could this actually be happening? And I thought, well, no, I mean, you can't cause, you know, actual physical, you know, facial swelling and things like that. And literally, you would touch my daughter's face, and it was like you touched her with a red hot knife. It was so painful because her face was so swollen, and it would swell up at night and then sort of go back down to in the day. And so anyway, the third time that we actually went up to see her, she discharged us and said, I don't think there's anything wrong. She said, and I said, well, I don't agree with you. And she said, if you don't agree with me, I'd like to phone her school, and I would like to see whether they're actually experiencing, you know, she's actually complaining there. to see what's happening. And I'm thinking, well, great, well then the school will actually see, because I know that she obviously said to the school that she's feeling really, really unwell. She said, and she has to go back. Now, at that point, we'd actually kept her off for, I think she'd been off for about 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And this was also over the Christmas holidays. And there had been no change with her through the Christmas holidays. All she wanted to do is like lie down on the sofa. So it wasn't like it was, and her birthday was, and she didn't want to go out on her birthday. So it wasn't like a change of behaviour and anything like that. So we agreed. We didn't really feel like we couldn't agree, as we didn't really think that there was any other way that we could, show what was actually happening with her.
Yeah.
So anyway, she rang the school. Oh, and on the last 2 times that we visited her as well, she insisted that Sophia go back to school. And I said, well, she's not well enough. She's not feeling well enough. But she said, oh, she needs to go back to school. Well, obviously, we found out later that's completely not the advice or guidelines, basically, that she should have been following.
Yeah.
And that would have definitely, we were told later that would have definitely made her condition a lot worse, because what was happening is her brain was trying to heal, but it was also trying to, they have at her school, they have huge, great big electronic whiteboards. And the electronic whiteboards, because you can't see it, but because they flash,
yes,
it means that your brain has to quickly process the information in lots, which is why screens basically are really tiring. And she would be on that probably, because they have maths and English in the mornings, that she would probably be on that for say 3-4 hours a day, and that was triggering everything off, and that would have just been really, badly kind of, so she was trying to learn, and her brain was trying to deal with the whiteboard, and basically was trying to heal at the same time. It obviously just wasn't happening. And obviously, power her body and do everything that you normally have to do, which you just don't realise.
Yeah.
And it wasn't being able to do that with the damage that had been there. And we found out later she did have it was called basically a mild traumatic brain injury. So a traumatic brain injury is basically when you have something sort of stuck in your head, in your brain. A mild traumatic brain injury is basically when there is damage, but obviously it isn't something, so you've had something actually enter your brain as such.
Yeah.
So so anyway, and the consultant as well really threatened us and basically said that she needs to go back to school. There was no other way. She had to go back to school. And I said, well, okay. I'm thinking, I do it also as well. I'd had a conversation with the attendance officer, and the attendance officer actually didn't seem really all that bothered. We'd explained that she was really, really unwell. And I'd actually professed, because obviously she'd had time off, and I was worried that, because attendance is such a really big issue at the moment.
Yeah.
Obviously I was worried that she was going to be missing out, and the attendance officer was quite happy if basically that the consultant would have just literally been able to put her on hospital education.
Right.
Obviously with the discharge that was not able to happen. Yeah, because it has to be done through.
Can I just clarify, we are talking about the same pediatric consultant you saw was the same person who you went back 2 and 3 times,
yes.
But it's also the same person that you'd filed a complaint via PALS.
Yes, unfortunately we had to go back to her because there was no one else. There was no one else. We were entering lockdown. People were kind of very, very scared, and we didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't even know if there was even going to be a hospital that was going to be dealing with anything whatsoever. It was like a perfect storm. The whole experience was like a perfect storm of just chaos. Yes, and we felt we had to go back to there was just no one else, because we'd made the complaint, and it was like, well, they didn't say, well, can you see a different consultant, blah 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 blah. There was nothing else that was offered.
Yeah.
So yeah, so anyway, we knew that because she was obviously better at home, that going back to school would just be horrendous because she was so unwell. And we walked into the school lobby, I remember it, to see her teacher and the deputy head,
Yeah.
which we'd had dealings with before with my son, which I will explain in a second. And he basically I remember him looking at her and saying, I've had a conversation with the consultant, and the consultant has said to me that Sophia will feel really unwell and that will be perfectly normal.
Right.
And he said that in front of her, to her. And I knew at that point that it didn't matter how unwell she was, she could be fitting dying on the floor, that he would take no notice of her. And I must admit, that broke me.
Yeah, that sounds awful. And then, of course, Sophia's heard that. It's been directly aimed at her, basically giving the sign of, it doesn't matter how unwell you are,
Yeah.
you will come in.
Yeah, you have to come in and you will have to stay. So it doesn't matter what's going on, you have to stay.
I do remember many years ago having a personal incident where I'd had quite severe glandular fever, nowhere to the extent of what Sophia's had with a head injury, but to the point where I'd been threatened with an oxygen tent and I was crawling around on all fours. And at the time I was at college, and my head of the course said, I don't care if you're dead and not breathing, you will come in. So I absolutely get that awful feeling of being a teenager and, okay, even if I'm dead, you still need me in. You are going to hound me until I get in.
Yeah, it was.
There is no way out. There is no way out. You have to come in, no matter how bad you feel. So for somebody who's had a head injury, that seems awful. Plus the fact, being nauseous is not a pleasant experience for anybody. I don't know anybody who loves being nauseous or vomiting. And she had both, didn't she?
Yeah, so it was just and dizzy and everything else that was going on, and just generally I mean she vomited at school quite a few times, and it was just awful, and they wouldn't let her home. So
and
anyway,
yet, if somebody else had vomited, the first thing they would have said is, you need to go home and you need to abstain from coming into school for 48 hours.
We did have that conversation quite a few times.
How does this work?
I know. Yeah. Oh no, we had lots of instances where you just sat there thinking, this is just, you are, well, I will carry on and tell you.
Yeah.
So basically, the first thing that happens at break time is that deputy head actually said to her, "Go on now, you can run around." Now I'd had a conversation with him. I said, under no circumstances is she allowed to do physical activity. I said, because she is really dizzy. I said, she'll end up falling on her face. I said, she is not allowed to do PE. And I said, under no circumstance. I said, because she has no balance. The balance is all over the place, and she kept falling over. So the first thing he said to her in the playground was, "Go on then, you can go and run around." And I'm thinking, oh my God. That day she went to a member of staff who was her TA, and who is a vile woman. And this was at lunchtime, and she was in tears because she felt so unwell. And the TA looked at her and she said, a dinner lady brought her to the TA, and she looked at her and she said, "Oh, I know about Sophia," and walked off and left her in tears.
So presumably you're learning about all of this from Sophia coming home to relay it to you, saying she's had a really horrendous day and this has happened. But all along, what I'm building up is a picture of professionals who either have believed that they are doing the right thing, or have come across as very unpleasant or to the extremities of being vile. The only person who seemed really lovely was almost the last visit to A&E, and that was a specialist in his own right of recognizing what was going on. So presumably everybody who's been unpleasant or inconsiderate have not really understood the severity, because somebody else of a higher authority has suggested that it's not as high an issue as the A&E consultant.
Yeah, absolutely. And
So
and it even carried on that day. That day she was almost, by that same TA, she was basically told that she had to do PE, and she was crying in the corner, and she said, no, I don't want to. And she basically was ridiculed a number of times by that in a lesson. And she tried to try to teach her. She was feeling really unwell, and she was so unwell that day, literally, and no one she said she came home and she said, I kept telling people I was unwell, mummy, she said, and no one listened. And she wet herself and no one listened. So you can tell how I can't even imagine how horrendous that must have been for her to actually have to deal with.
And
that point
go on.
At that point, I wrote a letter of complaint, and funnily enough, it triggered a referral to social services. Yeah.
So by now we've had 2 complaints.
Yeah.
We've only had one professional who seems to have understood the difficulties.
Yeah.
But also the fact is, there are other pieces of information that I kind of want to explore with you. So you say that Sophia had a TA. So why did she need a TA? And could we just clarify as well?
It was a class TA.
Just a class TA.
Yeah. One of the class TAs. Yeah.
And was Sophia expected to do homework? Was she expected just to go back to full time? Everything normal.
Full time.
Goodness.
And even when if you look at the nice guidelines, it basically says rest and return. So the policy is that the only way basically you are supposed to go back after having concussion, not even post-concussion syndrome, which is another step ahead. So if there are any signs of concussion, a person is basically supposed to completely rest, including no screens. And if they are symptomatic in any way, they are not supposed to return to school or work. If they are, then obviously they become non-symptomatic, then they literally go in very, very slowly, say just for an hour or whatever. If they are in any way triggering any symptoms, they then go back to resting again. And that's the rest and return policy. Right. And that's what should have happened. But so she should have not in any way, shape or form been anywhere near school.
Yeah.
But
okay, so you made another complaint, this time about the school.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I will actually say as well that we had requested, my son was having some horrendous bullying, which we'd had to go to the police about, which I'll tell you about in a second. And we'd actually requested some support for him and us to try and tackle that, which was low-level support through Families First. And we'd actually been a lady who we knew very well. She knew the family very, very well, used to come to us. She actually couldn't quite believe what was going on. And she was always very, very supportive. And we asked if she could be in the meeting, because apparently if you're referred to social services, you are supposed to, through the policy of the school, have a meeting beforehand to talk about it. And there was no meeting.
We want to do this justice, don't we, Rebecca? Because we feel this is such a big issue. And I know that, we have got so much more of this story to uncover, haven't we? So I know we've agreed previously that we will come back and do another episode, because there is far more meat to this story, is there not? There is so much more that we need to understand. But what we've got is obviously what has happened as the initial event, but through going through the right people and then the wrong people and then being supported by more wrong people, what we've got is this escalation of how a mum can be accused of fabricating induced illness. So we're going to take a pause, and obviously we will then go on to the next sort of bit of the story, as it were. And if it takes 2 or 3 sessions, I'm absolutely fine with that. I hope you are too. But because I think so many people will find this invaluable. So we're going to say goodbye now, but obviously Rebecca and I will be back for the next episode to learn a bit more about how the FII became quite a serious instance and how that impacted you and your family, because obviously there was a considerable impact with it. Thank you so much again for being so lovely and agreeing to kind of do this. But I know this is a cause that's very forefront of we have to do this. It's so important to raise this awareness. So I'm very grateful to you indeed. And my thanks obviously to everybody who's been kind enough to watch and take an interest in learning a bit more about FII. And obviously you're very welcome to watch the next episode, where Rebecca will be telling us even more interesting information that perhaps might be able to help other parents be signposted as to what they need to consider.